Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help you recognise and unlock the entrepreneur skills in your business. In this week's episode, I am delighted to be interviewing Mark Sears. Mark helps organisations and change makers to evolve and adapt. He runs a company that I love the name of. It's called Rewilding. Mark used to be the head of group brand strategy at Virgin Group, so I'm very interested in how did an introvert survive and thrive in the deeply extroverted world of brand and marketing. And watch out for my favourite part from Mark. How do we create a change that's bigger than ourselves? Later on we'll be having leadership tip of the week, but first it's Introvert Myth of the Week. Introverts aren't loud enough to run meetings. Well, that belongs in the bin. Firstly, do you really need to be loud to run an effective meeting? No. If you need to be loud for a moment, it's because the meeting has already got out of control. Meeting skills include listening, being aware of who's doing and thinking what, listening to what's not said, being good at summarising, and making sure that everybody gets their say so you get a better outcome. All of those are part of the introvert superpowers that I quite often talk about. So, can introverts run meetings? Actually, they're really good at it. Do let me know what introvert myth you'd like exposed, or what tip you'd like that would help you to activate the entrepreneurial skills in your business. I'd also love to hear your feedback about this series on the Apple iTunes Store or podchaser.com. Please take a moment after the show. And finally, if you'd like to talk to me about speaking at your conference, virtual or face-to-face, or working with your team, I'd love to hear from you. But now, let's get on with this week's interview. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about Rewilding in a moment, but just before you do that, I'd really like to know, are you introverted or extroverted? Somewhere in the middle? What's it all mean to you?
Yeah, it's a funny one. It's one that I guess as I've aged, now my mid-40s, but I've come to recognise quite how deeply an introvert I am. So I now realise I'm very introverted. At times, though, I've had to perform or kind of behave in a way where more extrovert qualities have come to the fore. So it's kind of like it's not one or the other throughout most of my life. But as I age, as some of those behaviours shed, I kind of get rid of some of those elements, I've come to realise quite how much of an introvert I am, and I've kind of come to sort of recognise it and honour it in myself and the way I behave.
So is that kind of saying, as you've got a bit older, you've ceased to worry about trying to be like other people and just be more comfortable with yourself? Or?
Yeah, I think it's not that I've ceased to worry. It's almost like I've forgotten how to pretend to be more extrovert. So actually, as I become more comfortable in my own self, it's almost like I can't pretend anymore. I just am the introvert that I really am.
And what point did you realise, I'm an introvert?
I think from quite an early age, I really needed that time. And then I think there's that sense of almost, because the dominant narrative in the world is that to be extrovert is the way that one has to be, or the structures of the world support extroversion. I just kind of, particularly as I went into the work environment, that I kind of acted in that way, or more of myself, whether that's the kind of, just acted in more of an extroverted way. But I guess, increasingly just realised that actually, no, I'm really the introvert. But it came from very early age. I needed space. I needed space to think, to feel, actually. From very early age.
So introversion to you very much about having space, needing space to think, needing space to feel and reflect on your own, I guess, to get the clarity of where you're going.
Yeah, and I think for me, increasingly, I realise it's about, sometimes it's just taking yourself away from humans. It doesn't mean that you don't have any other sensory um, interactions going on. It's just that it's the human bit that gets quieted for a bit, and you come to realise that you're more than just the human part. You're actually, that there are other bits. So it's actually, I think, quieting the human element, quieting human conversations, quieting human sensory overload, and bringing in space for other things. Silence being the main one, you know.
Absolutely, I get that completely. Now, I guess that's where rewilding comes in. But just before we talk about rewilding, you used to be head of group brand strategy at Virgin Group, and that sounds very extrovert and ab-fab and hello lovey, the opposite place to where you would want to be as an introvert. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I, for the first half of my career, I worked in the Virgin Group of companies, and I started as a graduate, moved up through the organisation and worked there for about 15 years. And it is this extraordinary thing, the Virgin Group. It is, if you like, an extroverted brand, although led by an introvert, as Richard, I think, would identify himself as. But, you know, as a brand, it's deeply extroverted. And, you know, but I think that's the thing, you know, it's like there is no, as an introvert, you can still work in an extroverted environment. I think sometimes you need to do the work to recognize yourself as an introvert within that. But I think for me, the Virgin brand was this extraordinary mechanism for change. That's how I view brand. Is actually, brand is about ideas, and to create and build a brand is a mechanism to create change through better ideas. The Virgin Group of companies for that part of my career was just this extraordinary vehicle for doing that.
That's a really different take on brand, and we've had a few people talk about branding on these episodes, but I love that idea about brand as a vehicle for change.
Yeah, it's you know. So brand, as I'm sure most people that are into brands would tell you, it's nothing to do with the logo, or the logo is the very final touch point on it. And at Virgin, it is an important element, but it's everything else that sits beneath the surface is what creates the brand. So it's every single interaction you have. But really, I'm not very interested in brands that aren't interested in shaking up things, turning things upside down, changing stuff. And that was what the attraction of Virgin was, over and above all of the other brands that are out there. I mean, there are lots of really great challenger brands now, but, you know, Virgin at its best is trying to shake things up. And that's what great brands can do, is just like change our way of thinking about things.
Okay, and so perhaps that leads us on to rewilding, when you changed your way of thinking about what you were trying to do with the world. Tell us about rewilding.
Yeah, so rewilding is most commonly understood as this idea of, you know, we'll take a patch of land and we'll rewild it, which is effectively letting nature take its course with it, and that's great. What I'm really interested in is us as human beings being wild, and I think the opposite of wild is to be tame, to be domesticated, and I think that's what we've become. And if you look at humans as a species, we've been on this planet for 240,000 years. Yeah, it's only the very last few seconds, if you like, of human time that we've become, that the Industrial Revolution happened, and we've become, you know, almost like machine humans. And yet, as our bodies and our minds have not evolved from our wildness. So what I'm encouraging people to do through rewilding is to step into this bigger sense of self, you know, to recognize that we're part of this extraordinary, you know, 3.8 billion year innovation lab, which is called life. And actually, how do we step into what is, you know, this, we've had this extraordinariness of life behind us. How do we make the most of who we are? And I think rewilding can help us to do that.
And where does that intersect, if it does at all, with the introvert inside you?
When we spend any time in nature, we tend to we kind of stomp through it. It's very much, we are at the center of it. When I think as an introvert, you tend to use more of your senses. Silence becomes so much more important. So actually what I encourage people to do is, you know, the very foundation point of my work with individuals and rewilding themselves to be better leaders, I encourage them just to spend time sitting and noticing. So actually, how do you apply that to the way we do business? Actually, is to recognize that the change that we're creating, you know, that we have the potential to create a change that is bigger than ourselves. That's how it worked in Virgin. You know, Virgin was about Richard saying, I through Virgin can create a change that is bigger than me as an individual. So actually, as an introvert, how can I actually step into something that is more and more powerful than me alone? And I think by just spending time noticing the awesomeness, the extravagance of nature, we can start to do that.
Okay, that makes a whole load of sense to me. We're kind of coming to the point where we might run out of time soon. So what I'd like you to do is just take from your life experience, your career experience, and if you were talking to an introvert that was saying, Mark, give me an idea how I can be a better person and an introvert, what would you say to them?
I'd go back to the point I've just made and say, create a change that is bigger than you are. You know, people would talk about this as purpose or being of service to something. So as an introvert, you might not want yourself to stick your head above the parapet. So actually stand for something that is bigger than you. Serve a system, serve something that is bigger, outrageously big, that you can serve.
I love that. Twisting it the other way around, because a lot of the listeners are non-introverts who manage or lead introverts. What tip would you offer a non-introverted leader so they can get more from their whole team?
So for me, I'd urge them to create conditions for ideas and imagination to thrive. You know, for introverts, that isn't the kind of cut and thrust. It requires space. It requires listening. It requires self-reflection. So really focus on, if you're a leader with introverts in your team, like every leader is, create space for imagination to thrive. If you don't do that, the imagination will not thrive for those individuals.
And is that physical space or is that time in the day? Is there anything particular that space?
I think it's both of those things. I think it's time in the day, absolutely. It's about saying that, I say I need percolation time. It's like, are you allowing percolation time? But I think it's physical space as well. Are you creating spaces where people can actually go? And that isn't just a little breakout room. It's actually, are you encouraging people to take space, to take time out, to create literal and physical space?
And I think that's a really good point there you make, which is, it's not about saying there's a room, it's encouraging people. And that might be the point at which we have to end, Mark. Yeah. But thank you very much for your time. It's been fascinating to talk.
My total pleasure. Thank you.
And so it's time for the leadership tip of the week. The tip for people that are leading introverts and want to get more from their whole team, introvert, extrovert, and everything in between. This week's leadership tip is about meetings, especially team meetings, which is where communications and culture tend to intersect in most firms, often leaving introverts worse off. Your tip is to get a different team member to facilitate each week's meeting. That way you'll get different styles running the meeting, and the meetings will take on different styles, allowing for more people to join in. More importantly, perhaps, you'll be able to focus on the content of the meeting rather than just running the meeting, and it's great development for your whole team. Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.